Welcome, Parke, to the 20s, our pre-show event that runs 20 minutes before each of our webinars begin.
Thanks, it's good to be here.
In this section, which we call a conversation with our presenters, we'd like to find out a bit about you, your life, and how you got to be where you are today. So why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Parke Gregg, and I am a principal here at Stuck On in Austin, Texas, and we are a finishing house, and we kind of focus on finishing films, feature films, and documentaries. We do commercial work from time to time, but our main focus is on, feature-length project. Yeah, right now I'm working on a remake of Slacker, the original Richard Linklater film, as kind of a fundraiser and an art experiment. They're remaking it, and 24 different filmmakers, each divided up the scenes, and it's getting made as a kind of an homage to the original.
Oh, nice. When is it scheduled to be released,
First premiere is going to be the end of this month, and it will probably do a festival circuit after that. I'm not really sure what their plans are.
Cool. So what's your workflow like? What kind of tools, obviously beyond Scratch, which obviously you use since you're going to be telling us about it, but beyond Scratch, what other tools do you use in your workflow?
Sure. Scratch is our main DI tool set, but it's best tied to a nonlinear editor, and we can work with projects from any of the popular editors. In-house, we use Final Cut Pro version 7, and it's a kind of our main editorial tool. And so we'll usually, if an Avid project comes in or a Premiere project comes in, we'll translate it to Final Cut Pro, and then kind of use that as our online in and out editor. So we can generate our files that we need for Scratch from that, and then when we export the files from Scratch, we can bring it back into Final Cut and sync up the audio and make our final deliverables.
Now, as a colorist, how do you stay creative? Obviously, you got to take direction from the director of their vision, but how do you also make suggestions?
Oh, well, film is not that different than fashion. There's trends, and I think it's real important to keep an eye of what's going on currently, but also, kind of see what's been done in the past. You definitely want to have in your repertoire a modern look for projects, but there's this deep history in film and color correction, and the tools have changed very quickly, and the processes have changed very quickly, but ultimately the result is the same, and so I think it's just important to keep an eye on what's going on out there, and also look at photography. Still photography is often a trendsetter as far as looks and color correction goes.
Interesting. Even paintings, I would imagine, right? To see paintings and
absolutely,
look at light and right.
Absolutely. Right. I mean, if you want to study light and shadow, look at the Renaissance artists, and nothing better.
Right. Definitely. Should the colorist be involved with the pre-production process to control the looks, or how do you feel about that?
I don't know about controlling the looks, but if the colorist is also the DI editor, then it's real important to be involved as early as possible, because a lot will be determined for convenience and budget, and you need to make sure that that's going to fit in your tool set and your workflow. Especially if it's a film or originated project or a RED or an RE, you need to be able to at least know what decisions are being made so that you can plan ahead, even though it might be a few months down the road. So the colors per se, you can definitely have creative discussions with the DP and the director, but the main issues with pre-production are nailing the post workflow. And so, yeah.
So at least from the technical perspective, they should be at least involved in that.
I think so.
Is it a standard practice when working with professionals that DP will involve the DI artist, or not really from the artistic perspective?
From an artistic perspective, it's always wishful thinking until it's actually shot and processed and all the constraints of production taken into account, and so you never really know exactly what will be able to be achieved, and so there's only so much that that a colorist could discuss early on outside of the technical realm. But once the edit's getting locked, and then it's definitely advantageous to have that discussion with the DP and the director to really hone in what their desires and wishes are.
Well, thanks for the interview. Unfortunately, we're out of time for our pre-show interview. I know you have to get ready for the main webinar, so we'll see you in a couple of minutes.
All right, sounds good.
Well, welcome everybody to our show, Using Color to Convey Emotion with Assimilate's Scratch, presented by Parke Gregg. I'm your host, Marcelo Lewin. And the goal of our webinar today is to show you tips and techniques for using Assimilate's Scratch to give your movie the look you want. For those of you that are new to our webinars, they last approximately 90 minutes. We take the first 10 minutes to thank our sponsors, go through some logistics, and introduce our presenter. Then 60 minutes is reserved for the main presentation, finally ending with prize giveaways and around 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. During our webinar, please feel free to post questions. You have a question box right in front of you. They will be moderated and answered during Q&A right after prize giveaways. Please make sure after the webinar to fill out our survey. They help us in knowing how we are doing. You will also receive an email about the on-demand webinar tomorrow. And finally, feel free to provide any feedback to us, good or bad. Just email feedback@filmmakingwebinars.com. Please do not record this webinar. It is being recorded on our end and will be offered later on as an on-demand version with lots of bonus material. We have a great killer prize to give away today. Winners will be picked randomly from the attendance list. You must be present in the webinar to win. And we know if you're here because we have a full list of who's online currently. To claim the prize, winners will be introduced to the company providing the prize via email by the end of the day today. The company providing the prize is in charge of shipping the prize directly to you. And finally, any questions you have regarding the prize should be addressed directly to the company providing it. Your presenter today is Parke Gregg. He's the founder, lead colorist, and editor of Stock On, an audio and visual post-production company. Parke won his first Summit, Addy, and Telly Awards as IBM Tivoli's Manager of New Media, and later in 1999 he launched PointSphere, a new media consulting firm. He was the post-production supervisor on the CNBC television series American Made, and associate producer for the Emmy Award-winning PBS documentary series The State of Tomorrow. Currently, Parke focuses on feature films and documentaries. His films include Take Shelter, Where Soldiers Come From, Restive, Blacktino, The Eyes of Me, and Happy Poet. He loves to hear from you. Please feel free to email him or check out his website at stockonon.com. I'm your host, Marcelo Lewin. I'm the founder of Filmmaking Webinars. Prior to this company, I created two other companies, including Pixelheads Network in 2008 and My Internet Desktop in 2000. I've also worked for other companies, including Walt Disney Imagineering, Toyota, NBC.com, plus others, creating and managing large-scale interactive media projects with an emphasis in digital media creation. I'm also a blogger, podcaster, professional videographer, and editor. Love to hear from you. Please feel free to check out my site or email me, marcelo@filmmakingwebinars.com. For those of you that are new to filmmaking webinars, we teach the art, science, and business of filmmaking. Filmmakers are our only focus, and our topics are for professionals working in film, video, or the web. Our presenters are working industry professionals, and you get to ask them questions live and get answers in real time. Also, during our live webinars, we usually offer great prize giveaways, such as today. Our on-demand webinars include not only the archive, but lots of bonus material. We also offer a very popular blog written by our presenters, the Digital Filmmakers podcast, available on iTunes, and filmmaking tools, including apps, ebooks, and other tools created by filmmakers for filmmakers at an average price of only $5 each. You can check it all out at filmmakingwebinars.com. Now it's time for our poll. We would like to know which DI function do you spend most of your time doing. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll right now. And go ahead and select the function that you do the most. Now, many of you may be doing all of these, but just choose the one that you do the most. All right, let's close the poll and let's share the results. And it looks like the majority of you are on primary color grading. Excellent. We'll continue on with our presentation here. So make sure you follow Filmmaking Dude and tweet that you are checking out the Using Color to Convey Emotion in Assimilate Scratch webinar. Don't forget to use the hashtag #FilmmakingWebinars. That's how we'll know who's tweeted. At the end of the day today, 2 random followers will be picked, and each one will win one on-demand webinar of their choice from us. So good luck. Also, remember to like us on Facebook. You'll get lots of information about our webinars, podcasts, blog articles, plus much more. Just go to facebook.com/filmmakingwebinars. Finally, before we start our feature presentation, I'd like to thank our sponsors, since it is thanks to them that we are able to offer these live webinars for free. And today we're offering this webinar is on demand for free as well. So we do want to thank Assimilate. Assimilate is the developer of Scratch, an industry-leading digital cinema engine that continues to revolutionize the movie industry. The Scratch digital workflow enables digital cinema and broadcast artists to generate dailies, conform, color correct, and finish within a single user-friendly and powerful solution. You can find out more about them at assimilateinc.com.
Great, thanks for joining us today. So I'm going to be talking about Scratch, specifically, nothing actually specifically. We're going to go over several aspects of Scratch that, because Scratch is a really unique tool. I think on their tagline they said it's a digital cinema engine, and I like that because it is a great color correction tool, but it's truly a full DI finishing suite. And I kind of like to explain it to people as the kind of a Swiss Army knife of tools. Like there's no one tool or there's no one path to work your way through Scratch, but there's this great collection of tools, and you can kind of use them however you see fit, or however the project you have needs to be used. And so that said, I'm going to be talking about kind of how I personally approach a project using Scratch. There's lots of different ways, lots of different workflows. They all are valid. This is just kind of the way I go about it. And today's presentation is going to be a little bit of a how-to technical thing, how to work through Scratch, but it's also going to cover my creative approach and how I deal with projects. By default, it's going to be an overview of several of the tools, but by no means is it all the tools that Scratch has. We're just going to be kind of touching the tip of the iceberg. One caveat I want to put out there is that Scratch has a unique vocabulary for its tools and its different functions, and I'll do my best to try to explain those vocabulary, but a lot of times I may just throw out a term that doesn't necessarily make sense, but I think by context and you watching what I'm doing will kind of make sense. All right, well, let's go ahead and load up a project. This is the intro screen to Scratch. And once you load a project, Scratch is kind of divided up into 2 areas. It's kind of like the construct area. That's what they call it, the construct. And it's kind of the organizing area. And then there's a work area, which they actually refer to as the player. Over here on the left of the screen, you can see that we have several groups and several different elements here. These are each what's called a construct. And a construct is more than just a timeline. It's truly kind of a container. It can definitely be a timeline, or it can contain a timeline. But like the one that's open right now is really just a bin of raw footage, and that's where you want to start, because we're going to go ahead and bring in an EDL and kind of start at the very beginning of a project. And so the first thing that you do, that I've already done, is that you just import all your shots. So all your raw footage. In this case, these are film scans. And let me jump back just a second. The clip that we're going to be working on today is from the feature film called Take Shelter, that directed by Jeff Nichols, and Sony Pictures Classics is putting it out this fall. And so I just want to thank them for letting us use their footage and use this scene. All right, so the first thing you'll be doing is loading an EDL. This is a standard EDL from any of the nonlinear editors. So down here in the very center of the screen, I'm going to click on Load EDL. And I happen to have a sample EDL right here. I'm going to click on Open. And so this brings up our EDL assembler. And this is basically a layout of exactly what's written in the EDL. And the first thing that we want to do is link this EDL to our raw footage. And all of raw footage was in that construct that we saw just a second ago. And so in the center bottom of the assembler, you have different criteria that you can choose. Like right now, match time code is highlighted, match reel is highlighted, and match name is highlighted. I'm going to go ahead and use all that criteria, and I'm going to click on Start Matching right here, and then look at this right column on the matrix here. It's empty right now, so I'm going to click on Start Matching, and very quickly it searches through all the content and finds any matches appropriate. And so most of these are just one. That means that there's just one clip it found, but a few of these it's saying, well, I kind of found two clips that that might work. So let me go ahead and give you that option instead of just assuming one or the other. And sometimes that'll be 3 or 4. It all depends on the project. So sometimes you can look at the shot name or the reel and kind of figure it out. You can also kind of scroll through each of these clips, and if you're really familiar with the edit, then you'll kind of be able to choose which one it is. In this case, I know the clip name is clip 1, and so it's this top one. And one thing about Scratch, whether it's in the construct or in a view like this, whatever clip is on the bottom is the clip that is active. And so in this case, this clip is the one that it's assuming is right, but in reality it's this one. So we're going to use these little arrows, push that down to the bottom, and so that's how we designate that's the clip we want. So let's scroll through here through our EDL, see wherever there are other discrepancies. Here, yet there's another one. Okay, clip 20. Okay, again, I'm going to choose this other one, just move it down, and a couple more discrepancies. I'm going to switch those. Clip 28 and 29. All right, so double check. I've gone through and touched up those, kind of made my decisions. If you can't make a decision, you can always, in the center bottom here, there's this include duplicates, and so it will just include those different options if you're not really sure which one it might be. And okay, I think I'm ready, so I'm going to click on Assemble down here in the bottom right of the assembler window, and it confirms. Okay. Boom, instantly we have our timeline. Okay, so this is a representation of that EDL linked back to that source footage. And as you scroll through here, you can see where I chose to include duplicates, so it's giving me those two options. But whatever's on the bottom is what's active. And I think we're good. All right, so that's a real brief overview of bringing in an EDL, and at this point we can get started on our project. I'm going to jump to another construct that I had pre-built. It's basically identical to that one, minus the duplicates. And we're going to enter the work area. To enter that work area, you hit this very center button. It looks like a play button. And so right off the bat, we're looking at this footage. And before I get into anything, I always like to set up the project. And I like to think about what does every shot in this scene or this reel need? And so what can I apply right off the bat that will save time in the long run? For one thing, this project was shot in a 2:3:5 perspective. It wasn't anamorphic, and so it requires a crop. And so let's go ahead and apply a letterbox so that we'll be looking at what the final deliverable is going to look like. So if you right-click, you get this cool little wheel of wonder. And these are all the different areas inside Scratch, basically your different working tools. I'm going to click on Guides, and that brings us to, and I think you'll probably notice that where this image is right now, that's kind of your canvas, your work area. Excuse me, it's not a canvas, that's a different term in Scratch, but your work area, and then all your tool variables are at the very bottom of the screen. And so I clicked on Guides, and it brought us this option. So we have several presets. We can choose one. I mean, we could create a custom one, but this is 2:3:5, and so that's what we want to choose. We're going to click on Guides, and that immediately drew this yellow box. I want to go ahead and blank it, so it's a true letterbox. All right, so that's what our project's going to look like as far as the aspect ratio. and you can scroll through. And this little graphic right here in the middle is a basic representation of the timeline. Scroll through, you can see that letterbox is applied. And this is cool because when you get to the output and you want to render these out, you can choose whether you want to bake in that letterbox or not. You can also choose if you just want to send it out to your SDI out for your monitoring or not. And so it's not a permanent setting. It's just a real-time letterbox that it applies. The next thing we want to think about is continue on that idea of what does every shot need. And I like to pre-build my secondaries. And in Scratch, your secondaries are referred to as scaffolds. And the best analogy for scaffolds I can think of is they're like layers in Photoshop. And they truly build on top of each other, just like a layer would. And so essentially your first layer is your primary, and then any layer below that is your secondary. And they're all called scaffolds. And so on this left window over here, and you may have noticed I pulled that up by, Scratch has this cool little UI effect where if you just swipe on and off the left side of the screen, it pops up that window. Right now it's empty. I'm going to click Create, and you might notice it added two things. By default, there's a primary scaffold, and then your first secondary. I'm going to go ahead and call this one. Sorry. I'm going to call this one my highlights. And I'm not doing any grading right now. I'm just kind of setting up a shell that is just kind of waiting to be applied. So I'm going to right-click, bring up our wheel of wonder, go over here to the matrix, and the matrix is your color correction tools. And I'm going to click on qualifier. I'm working down here in the bottom left right now. And so I'm going to set up a qualifier for this scaffold that I've labeled high. And you can do a key in here, but it also has these presets for highlights, midtones, and shadows. And that's what I'm going to initially be using. Okay, I'll turn blue because your scaffold by default is showing the matte. So, basically whatever, in this case, is blue is being affected. I'm going to turn that off. I had accidentally created another scaffold. I'm going to call this mids. And I'll go and create one more. And we'll call this shadows. And then I'm going to apply midtones, turn off the matte. Then on the shadows scaffold, I'm going to choose the qualifier shadows. And basically these are curves, and you can adjust these curves however you see fit. For me, I think they're, at least to begin with, they're great. And so now I already have a secondary that's only going to affect my highlights, only affect my midtones, and only affect my shadows. So I'm going to, select all those and click Group here at the bottom of the scaffolds window, just to keep things organized. We'll call these the Holy Trio. Or let's call it the Trio. All right. So let's go ahead and create an empty scaffold. I like to just have one sitting there. You never know. And then I'm going to create another one. We'll do this one for saturation. I tend to have my saturation at the end of the line. And that's the thing. You can think about it as you go down. Each layer gets layered on top. So you begin with your primaries, and then it's in order. Everything that follows it goes on top. And then some projects you might need a vignette. On this scene, I don't think we'll be using any vignettes, but on a lot of projects you do. And so it's always a good idea to go and pre-build one. It'll save time, especially if the client's sitting down with you. And so I'm going to pre-build a vignette. So I clicked on the vignette scaffold, and then in the matrix down here in the bottom left, I clicked on canvas. And canvas is where you draw a window. And right off the bat, I chose circle, and so we have this pre-built circle. I'm going to change the shape of that a little bit. And this is a good intro into how to deal with numeric variables in Scratch. There's several ways. Like right now I'm looking at the scale X and Y of this circle. And so if I want to adjust the X, you can just click on it once and this calculator pops up. Or this is kind of a cool function. You can click and hold and then just kind of pretend you have a knob. You know, you can rotate as if it was a knob. And so let's go ahead and get a good oval. And now I want to shrink all those down so it's relatively small. Increase the softness so we have a gradient coming in and out of that. And since it's going to be a vignette, this is just kind of a generic lens vignette. I'm going to click on invert, meaning down here in the bottom right is invert. So whatever I apply works on the outside of the shape, not on the inside. All right. Let's see. Looks like I have a scaffold that's got the mat on. Let me turn that off. All right. Well, we're not going to be using vignette right now, but if we do need it, it's there. And so you may notice that you have a capital A. I'm over here in the scaffolds on the left side. If you have a capital A, it is means it's an active layer. If it's a lowercase a, it's not active. So we're going to go and turn that off. I'll keep my saturation layer on, and then we have our highlights, midtones, and shadows. All right, so this is a pretty good setup that will get you going. Again, you know, there's no actual grade applied to this, but it sure will save time once you get going. So what else does everything in this scene need? In this particular one, I know that I'm going to be using a grading LUT. And so this film was, this project was shot on film, a Kodak Vision 3 film. And so we had a custom LUT made by Steve Shaw over at Light Illusion to help us on this grading process. So down here in the lower left in the matrix, I'm going to click on LUT. And I'm going to go ahead and apply. First, let me put this in my primary. I'm going to go and apply a grading LUT. And so, you know, this is a typical navigation folder system. Go find this LUT that we had made. And what this LUT does is it translates the color space from the native color space of that film stock into Rec 709, and Rec 709 was the determined color space that we were going to finish this project in. And so it's not it doesn't magically, you know, do our grade for us or anything, but it kind of puts us in a realm that we can now work with it. All right, so this is a very basic set of scaffolds that I now want to apply to the rest of the scene. And so as I scroll through this, we can see that, you know, those scaffolds are on the first shot, but not the second one. So there's a couple of ways that we can apply. In this case, it's a grade, even though there's not much going on, to the following shots. And so once you're parked on this shot, on the lower right, there's all these M buttons, M1 through 8, and these are memory buttons, kind of like a calculator. And so what we want to do, and use that, you can use these buttons to save a grade. And to save it, you hold down Shift and then click on one of the buttons. For now, I'm just going to save this as M4. And then when you go on to another shot, you can just click on M4 and it will apply that grade. In this case, it's applying our organized scaffolds and that grading LUT. Another way that you can apply the grades is you can do a copy and paste. And so I'm going to copy this grade and scroll over to the next shot, and then I'm going to click on paste. And instead of just pasting everything, it gives you the options of what all you want to paste. And depending on the complexity of that grade, you can choose any of these variables. But I know we want the grade, and we want that grading LUT, and we want the scaffolds, because that's our main thing. And so you could click on paste right here, and that would just apply it to this shot. But there's also this cool button that says paste forward. And this allows you to paste that grade on this shot and every shot forward. So every shot down the line. And so this is a perfect tool for just applying this organization. So I'm going to click OK. And then Scratch is saying, are you sure you want to do that? Because it's going to overwrite everything. And yes, I'm sure. So let's continue on. All right, so I'm gonna thumb through these shots, and it looks like our grading LUT has been applied to everything. All right, so now we're organized. We got this pre-built scaffolds, so we can get going. So now comes the fun part. Let's begin our grade. Let's do a primary grade on these first few shots. And I'm gonna play them for you. Now keep in mind, just because of the medium of the webinar, the playback may not be very fluid on your end. Just so you know, Scratch has a great playback engine, and so it can pretty much play almost anything in real time. But this shot inside this movie is one of several dream sequences, and the audience doesn't necessarily know it's a dream sequence right off the bat, and that's a really important note to keep in mind when you start working on this. And so the basic intro to the scene is our father, the main character played by Mike Shannon, comes out and he sees his daughter looking out the window. There's a really odd storm brewing outside the house, and so there's a lot of audio effect that is accentuating this scene. And part of the oddity is it's coupled with this really bright. So it's like bright, sunny outside and stormy, and that's kind of the first clue, albeit subtle, that things maybe aren't quite normal. And so with that in mind, let's look at this first shot. And yes, it's a transitional shot, but you know, the chances are if it's put in the edit, it's got some value, it's got some meaning. And so I always like to stress that, you know, it's really important to study the edit, you know, really figure out what the editor and the director are trying to accomplish from a story perspective, and always keep that story in mind. So anytime you have an opportunity to read the script, or talk with the director beforehand and really get a gist of the feeling and the mood of particular scenes or the movie as a whole, it's going to just educate you that much more about what to do and try to get it right the first time. And so, like, we have this storm, and it's this weird storm. It's really bright outside, but it's a pretty bad storm. And so on that note, let's get going. And so right off the bat, this is so contrasty. So I'm going to click on my primaries, and down here in the bottom left, I'm going to click on my levels. And basically right off the bat, I want to raise the offset, the master offset, just so that these blacks aren't so crazy black. And then I'm going to click over here in my numeric. And this gives me a numeric value of almost all the grades that we're doing. So I'm going to bring down the gain so that, yes, it's bright outside, but it is stormy, and so we need to find a good balance. And yes, this is a dream, but you know, we don't want to give that away, so it needs to be based in reality. And that's kind of one of the tricks of this whole movie, is that we're teetering on this line of reality and dream, and is this guy going crazy or is he not? And you know, as I'm going through this, please ask questions on the webinar. We're going to have a question and answer session at the end, and so go ahead and ask as many questions as you can, especially with things that I don't cover or concepts that you want a little more detail on. All right, so I think that brings down our gain pretty good. It's starting to look a little stormy. It's a little too green. I think, you know, I'm sure we're looking out at a yard. And one of the ideas of this storm is, at least where I'm from, out in West Texas, you know, there's always a difference between like a crazy hailstorm or a potential tornado than just a typical thunderstorm coming in. And it usually had to do with the color, the kind of the ambient color before the storm hit. And often it was a little pinkish or a little green. In the middle of the afternoon, you know, that's kind of a weird look. And so as the director and I were talking about that, you know, we had similar accounts from our own background of kind of what makes a weird storm. And so with I have a control surface here, and so I have a ball that's attached to the gain. You can also just go in this numeric area and manually adjust these numbers if you want. What I was doing was rolling the ball, adding a little bit of of red to it, taking a little bit of the green out. At the same time, it was taking a little bit of the blue out. If you click on, in the lower left, if you click on color, that you will get at these color wheels, and those give you a good reference of kind of where you're at, because sometimes, you know, you kind of lose track, especially if you're just looking at numbers, or more importantly, hopefully you're just looking at the image. All right, so that's kind of a stormy looking scene. I'm not going to do a whole lot to it right now because we need to see where we can take the next footage. And so while that was, the previous shot was a transitional shot, this is kind of the intro of our main character. And it's always a good rule of thumb, regardless what's going on, your main character needs to look good. That doesn't necessarily have to be in a positive light, but it can certainly be in a negative light, but it's got to look good. And so, again, right off the bat, I'm looking at this film scan, and they sent us really dense scans. You know, it's not your typical log scan. Usually a log scan's a little more milky and whatnot. And so the first thing I want to do is raise the offset, the master offset, to kind of take full advantage of the log curve. And I'm going to go ahead and pump it up pretty high. Obviously, it's not looking like the direction that we want to go. You know, it's stormy outside, it's moody, it's a dream, yet we don't necessarily know it's a dream, and it's not it's, you know, we need a kind of a foreboding environment. And the way they shot it, you know, there's a lot of shadows and that kind of thing. But from a technical perspective, I've got this really dense image, and I need to lighten it from a density aspect. So go ahead and raise up the offset dramatically, and then start pulling it back down. And so right off the bat, I'm going to pull down the gain to kind of get it back where I feel like the highlights are not being blown out. And then I'm going to go and lower the lift so that we can get some decent blacks. It's not something that we want to get real crunchy with, but I feel like, you know, a little something. Okay, so the way I'm interacting with this is, again, with my control surface, where I have a knob assigned to the master lift and the master gain. Again, you know, you can click on these values and enter them manually, or do that little virtual knob effect. Okay, from just a contrast standpoint, I feel like we're getting somewhere close. I'm going to click over to my saturation scaffold, and over here on the lower right is the saturation area, and I'm going to bring that down to 85. I think that might be a good starting point. Like, already we're starting to get, you know, a more realistic shot. You know, I'm going to take the grade off for a second. That's where we started. So that's where we're looking. It's definitely way too amber, though. So let's work on that. I'm going to go back to my primary and the gain. I'm going to try to take away some of this red. Let's see what I can do. It's getting really blue. All right. Well, that almost immediately jumps us into a world that I like a lot better. I'm going to, on the lower left here, I'm going to click on color. Just take a reference of where I am on the color wheel for my gain. And tweak it just a little bit to kind of get where you're going. All right, let's scroll back in this shot a little bit, because he walks through this shadow, and it's kind of cool. So he enters the hall. He's got a highlight on his face. He kind of goes through some shadow and then comes back. It's starting to look pretty good. Let's see what else we can do to it. And again, it's like we're trying to set the mood, right? But we have to stay true to the film as a whole. You know, this is not a fantasy film, so everything is rooted in reality. And so we need our skin tones to look real, but we need it to look moody. And and keep them. Everything that you want to do, is to help tell the story. Okay, I think our shadows. Let's warm our shadows. It seems like or at least warm the lift up a little bit. I think that's going to help his skin tone, so he doesn't get all fleshed out. All right, that kind of made the image a little too amber. I'm going to go ahead and pull a lot of the red and the green out. And this may look like I'm going in the wrong direction. I'm pulling this out of the gain over here on the lower right. It's clearly too much blue. So if you're ever having a problem like dialing it in, using your ball to get it where you want it to go, just manually enter it, because you can enter combinations that are not technically possible on the color wheel, because everything has a relation to each other. But if you want to just pull some blue out and not affect where you are with the red and green, do it. I'll just enter 50, see what happens. Yeah, see, that kind of puts us back to where we want. I think it's still a little blue in the highlights. So let's bring that down to 20. All right. Well, to me, that's starting to look good. Let's compare it to the shot beforehand and see what we can do. Yeah, I think that's feeling like a similar area. It's a little flat. So I'm liking everything, but I think it's a little flat. And so over here in the tone, this is in the lower kind of middle left, you've got an S curve and you have a defocus and you have a contrast. I'm going to just boost this contrast up just a little bit to just get it a little punchier. And I think that will help us with our blacks and whatnot. Yeah. Okay. All right. I think we're done with this shot for now. So let's move on to the next shot. So this is where our character is looking around this corner, and he looks in and he sees this, his daughter next to the window. We're hearing this building storm. Things are starting to get crazy. And he's justifiably a little worried and a little weirded out that his daughter's just staring out at the storm. And so right off the bat, I'm going to just apply this grade that we've been working on to this scene and see what happens. And there's a great way to do that in Scratch. Over here in the lower right, there's an arrow, 2 arrows, and you can click on back. And so and then you see it says -1. That's saying grab the grade from one shot before and apply it. And it'll temporarily apply that. You can click a couple, so 2 shots back, and this is that shot. All right, I'm going to just grab the one right before, click apply, and there we have it. So that seems like it's in the ballpark, but yeah, it's kind of a blue shot. And so here's where I'm going to start using my secondaries to tune that. Right off the bat, it seems like the shadows, the mids are a little high. I'm going to bring that, so I'm going to click on my mid scaffold, bring that down a little bit so it's just a little bit darker. After all, the lamps are on in the room. And so on the same note, I'm going to bring the highlights down so that the outside window is not so glaring. And then I'm also going to warm that up a little bit. So I'm using my control surface right now, but you can see here on the gain that I'm making some adjustments to add some warmth. I'll click on color so you can see where I am on the color wheel. Neutral being in the center, moving up towards orange a little bit. And then again, I'm going to do the same thing on the mids. This time I'm going to use my gamma, add a little bit of warmth to the scene. So the chair and the couch and everything's starting to look a little bit more like this world. Okay, I'm kind of liking everything except these lamps, and these are incandescent lamps, and so they're not really doing any magic for me right now. So this empty scaffold that I created, I'm going to activate it, and down here in the lower left, I'm going to click on Canvas, and I'm going to draw a shape to kind of select an area around that lamp that I want to affect. You know, with every shape, we want to add softness. So again, down here in the bottom center, the softness variable, I'm going to click and do that virtual knob feature and create a softness around that. It's a little bit big, so I'm going to adjust the scale. And then you can just click on the shape and move it around. Now, if you have an SDI out, you don't see the shape, and so you can tweak it and only see the effect and not actually see the outline of the shape. For now, I'm going to just warm this up, and I'll click away so that you can see it. Okay, so before, after. All right, that's a little severe. I'm going to bring that back down. Let's see where I am in the color. Bring that back down. You know what? I don't think I want to adjust my gamma on that. Let's go and just adjust the gain. So it's kind of truly the luminance of the light. And I think my scaffold is, my shape is a little too small. And so I'm going to adjust the Y variable. Oh, I'm sorry. Adjust the X variable so that it can run off the edge of the shot. All right. Let's see. Just a little more orange with that incandescent, maybe a little more yellow actually. All right, before, after. All right, that's kind of doing what I want it to do. So I'm going to label this scaffold so I know what's up. Especially when I come back to it. It's always hard to come back to a shot when you haven't labeled your scaffolds. Then I'm going to hold down Alt, and by moving that scaffold, by holding down Alt, you duplicate it. And so I'm going to have a duplicate because I'm going to drag this one just right over here and apply it to this other lamp. And so that I have lamp over here, and I have lamp over here. All right, before and after. There's before and after on the right lamp. All right, so here's our shot to begin with, and here's where we're ending. I feel like that is a pretty good grade. You know, definitely we're introducing a moodiness. I feel like we're staying true to the story, but we're not giving away too much, and we're not getting in the way. If I ever see errors in color correction, it's usually that it's getting in the way. You know, far too much processing and activity done. Yeah, this still looks a little blue. I'm going to go back to my primaries, and I'm going to pull out some of that blue using my gamma. And I think also the lift. All right, so working with contrast and color, we're maintaining detail in the shadows. We have good highlights. We have good skin tones. And we're still maintaining this moody, crazy scene. Okay, so now we've set these three shots, and you may have noticed as I scroll forward, there's, you know, we come back to both these shots. And so let's figure out how we can apply those grades. So we're going to go back to on the lower right, we're going to go back to our trim tools. And, you know, the last time we saw them, that was 2 shots back. So click on that twice and then hit apply. I'm going to move forward to the next shot. Go 2 shots back, hit apply. Move forward, 2 shots back, and apply. Fortunately, these tend to be working. You know, a lot of times you'll have a different take, or they may go back and reshoot a certain thing, and then the grade will entirely be different, and then you'll have the need to match it so that you don't feel any difference. All right, so let's see how we're doing on this. I'm going to play it now. Again, it might be choppy because playback over the webinar is not that great, but on my end, it's smooth. And all right, I think we've adequately portrayed the emotion in that scene. So let's move on to looking at some other stuff that Scratch can do. One of the cool features in Scratch is that it supports OFX plugins. And so there's ample opportunity to go beyond a color grade and to really do some visual effects work. A lot of people are doing some basic compositing, and as the Scratch tool matures, they're incorporating more and more compositing tools. Right now, I'm going to just kind of highlight the use of one particular plugin and kind of how we can help the story as also kind of meet the wishes of the director. I'm going to go back to my construct and click on a timeline or a construct that I had already been working on that already had the grades applied. And looks pretty similar to what we were just doing. I think I maybe made that shot a little lighter in the real one. All right, so I had a note from the editor that in the middle of this shot, there needs to be some camera shake added. And so fortunately, I'm going to go back to the construct and show you, well, I have a note right here, needs shake. But these three clips that I'm highlighting right here are all the same clip, but there's a through edit. And so there's a little piece of it that's notched that in the note says it needs some camera shake. And this all goes back to the story. He's worried about his daughter. Yeah, let me go and play some of this. So he's worried about his daughter looking out the window at the storm, and he goes, and then he sees what she's staring at, and there's this dude just right outside the window, and it freaks him out. And then right at that time, the storm is escalating. The house starts shaking. They lose electricity. The guy's trying to break in, and the storm continues to escalate severely. And he's getting worried. The whole house begins to shake. And ultimately what happens is the house gets sucked up in a tornado, and then it free falls. And so we've got this furniture floating, and this is truly where we dive deep down the rabbit hole of a dream. And so how can we add to this? How can we help? In camera, they did a lot of great camera shaking. You can see the camera moving around here and there. Also, let's see, where is that clip that I was looking at? Okay, so right here is this initial kind of foreshadowing, being some, ground movement, or that the storm is really intensifying. And I think there's probably a bolt of lightning or something that signals this. But I'm going to go and park on this clip. Let me make sure that I'm on the one that I'm interested in. Yeah. And I want to apply a camera shake to this area. So I'm going to click on my Wheel of Wonder, go over here to Process, and then I have FX Controls, FX Inputs, and then Shot Configuration. So in FX Controls is where I can insert a plugin. Here we have the Sapphire plugins by GenArts installed, and in the Distort category, there's a shake. So I select shake and apply. All right, so I got these new variables. With these, let's just see by default what happens. Again, with the playback, I don't know what it's going to look like on your end, but I don't know if you could tell, but it was a little obnoxious. Truly like crazy camera shake. And to make it believable, it needs to be subtle. And it's also, because this is a through edit, it needs to, the first frame of it cannot be completely wild. It And so we need to ramp into this plugin. And a super cool feature is that we can animate these variables. And so right off the bat, I know that I'm just going to use the amplitude and frequency settings of this plugin. I'm going to leave everything else the same. There's actually 2 pages of variables just on this Shake plugin. GenArts are great for giving you full control, arguably too much control. All right, so I'm going to start off with 0 amplitude. Amplitude is kind of the amount of, see, I'm drawing a wave. It's kind of the amount of wave, and then the frequency is how fast it goes to the extremes of that wave. I think 8 is probably a good frequency, but we want to start out with a 0 amplitude, so it's not doing anything. Then the lower right here is the animation section. I'm going to click on Manual, and then click Set Key, meaning we're going to assign a keyframe right there. And then when you get this kind of highlighted parentheses at the end of the variable, means that that area is now being animated. Let's go maybe 6 frames. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. And that will be our second keyframe. I'm going to push this up to 0.2. And if you recall, the default was 1, and that was way too much. So we'll start at 0.2, set a keyframe, and then I'm going to go to the end of this clip. And we want that back down to 0. So we kind of ramp in and ramp out. And set keyframe. All right, I'm going to press F12 on my keyboard, and that will render out just this clip. Boom, very fast. And again, I'm not sure about playback, but let's see what happens. All right, so there's a little bit of buzz, and it looks like the editor placed that right where to kind of give a cue for the lead character to look back out the window, like, you know, he got rattled a little bit. There we go. And it's very subtle, but these are the kind of things that can really sell the realism and kind of put the whole scene over the edge. So we're going to be dealing with a lot of camera shake, and so that's where we're just adding it where it didn't exist. In this next example, I want to show you how we do some camera shake to kind of help a transition, because you may have seen a moment ago, we are cutting to a CG effect, a visual effect. In this case, the floating furniture was done by a visual effects company called Hydraulics. They do lots of great work. And so this is a purely CG animated scene that we need to integrate into our live action scene and make it look flawless. And so, you know, what can we do? The first thing that I notice is that in the shot right here before it, there's some camera movement. And then in this scene, there's no camera movement. And we come back to them, we have some camera movement. And so because this house is, you know, theoretically falling through the air, we need to match that camera movement. And it doesn't have to be exact. And it's not something that anyone would necessarily be able to put their finger on. But by adding that, we can just increase the realism, just very subtly, but very effective. And also what I notice is that, like, see his face? Like, he starts to shudder right before this happens. And so in discussing this with the director, we decided that it would be great if there was kind of this last buzz, like the house is about to fall apart, and then we kind of go into this spacey serenity of the free fall or the furniture floating. And so to do that, let's go ahead and add our shake effect, but let's add it to this transition and kind of make a transition out of it. And so real quick, I'm going to jump over to the edit mode. And in the bonus material, we go into a lot more detail about the edit mode. But for right now, I'm just going to click back a few frames and then insert an edit. And then go to the next scene and probably another 5 frames into this scene so that we have a total of approximately 10 frames. So I inserted an edit so that we can apply the plugin just to that area. And again, in the bonus material of this webinar, I go into a lot more detail about this edit mode. So I'm going to right-click, go back to the matrix, and find the beginning of this shot. Okay, and so right process, same steps. I'm going to add the shake plugin. Click OK. You know, this time it's not about camera movement. It's more like about this like kind of crazy vibration, like things are going to fall apart. And so I want the amplitude very small. We'll try 0.1, and I'm going to put a frequency of 10. You know, a key feature that I think I actually forgot to do in the last one is we want to turn on the motion blur. The motion blur is what kind of makes this real, because if this was a camera shaking, you would obviously have motion blur. So you can look at the image, it's on right now, and then it's off. And so by adding that motion blur, it's going to really help the realism, and it would have helped on that last one too. All right, and so let's go to the first part of this next shot, and we're going to apply the exact same plugin just for those few frames of that first shot. Amplitude of 0.1, just the frequency to 10, and turn on our motion blur. All right, and you know, another thing to keep in mind is you might be working in this little window. It might be 10 inches in your world, and hopefully you have an SDI monitoring system. You know, that might be like a 20 or 30 inch monitor. And in an ideal world, you have a projection screen. But you got to keep in mind, when things are projected, any kind of movement like this is dramatically different. It's dramatically enhanced when it's on the full screen of a theater. So you got to keep it subtle, or it's going to be over the top. All right. Let's just play that through, see what happens. Let me render that, so it is a little weird. You know, if anything, it's just that it's the motion blur that's helping this. And so that kind of bridges this gap between these two shots. And it's important because this being a live action shot and the next shot being CG. I'm going to play it through. And again, I don't know if you could see it on the webinar, but it just adds this kind of buzz, and it's really a good bridge. All right, so now that we're in this shot, you know, we got to go back to the original problem that we noticed, that there's no camera movement in this shot in the furniture floating, but the shot afterwards and the shot before it has some natural camera movement. And so, using the exact same plugin, we are going to do yet another effect. So I want to go to the very beginning of this shot, right after the buzz. And I'm going to insert, again, the shake plugin. And we're going to animate it as well. Similar to our first attempt, we want to start at 0. And I'm going to really reduce the frequency, because this is more about this like spacey, like, you know, if this is the eyes of our main character, you know, like he's, I'm like moving around in my chair, you can't see me, but he's starting to float. We kind of are in a zero gravity situation, and let's make this subtle frame movement so that it will accentuate that. And you know, interestingly enough, this is something that the CG guys really wanted to add, but because it was out of context because the edit wasn't completed, we didn't know exactly how it was going to intercut with the shots around it. And so that's why we reserved this until the DI phase where we could add it. All right, so I've got some initial settings. Remember to turn my motion blur on. And again, I'm just going to adjust the amplitude and frequency here. So I'm going to set my first keyframe by clicking on manual in the lower right of the screen. I'm going to hit set key. And that will give us our first keyframe. And so maybe like a second in, I'm going to, let's see, where were we? Yeah, like a second in, I think I'm going to add another keyframe. And here I want to increase the amplitude, which is basically the amount of movement that the camera will do. And then I'm going to keep the frequency the same, a really low number, because we don't want the camera moving fast, but we want it, you know, just kind of wandering around, floating around. Okay, I'll set my keyframe for that. And then we'll want to keep these variables for a little while. And even as I slowly frame through this, you can see a little bit of camera movement. That kind of helps the yeah, always keep it subtle. And then I think about 60 frames later, maybe somewhere in here, I'm going to add another keyframe because I want those settings to hold until here. But what I'm looking at, or what I'm thinking about, is the following shot. And so, like, what is the camera doing here? It's kind of bobbing and jerking a little bit. And so maybe we need to ramp to something closer to that setting so that it will ease that transition into the next shot. And so I'm going to go to the last frame of the shot and set my keyframe there. So I want my amplitude of 0.1. So the amount of camera movement is a little less, but I'm going to increase the frequency so it's a little quicker bobbing around. And set my keyframe. All right, so I'm going to hit F12 on the keyboard to render this sequence out. So as it's rendering, you can probably kind of get an idea in slow motion of what's going on with this frame. And right here at the end, it starts to bobble just a little bit, which gives us a good transition into the next scene. All right, so I'm playing it through now. We've got a little camera movement. And that really helps, you know, sell it that we're back into this world. You know, like what other things can you do? Because you can add plugins on top of this. I won't go into a lot of detail right now, but this is this following shot is a shot that I also worked on, adding the same kind of camera movement, but we also added these light rays. It was with the idea of like, again, like, how do we help sell this better? Like, the visual effects guys did a great job, and they definitely could have done this work, but, you know, we were at the end of the line, and, you know, we were thinking about what could we do to help this? And, like, if the idea that the house is really rumbling and whatnot, there'd be more dust and stuff in the air. And so I used another GenArts plugin to add these little light rays, just to give a little more atmosphere into the scene. All right. So that gives us a pretty good look. We did a conform. We brought our EDL into our project, relinked it back to the media, and then we did some grades on it, you know, focusing on story and setting a mood and a tone for this scene. And then we worked with kind of enhancing these visual effects, using a plugin to help, again, tell the story, help smooth some of these transitions. And so say we're done with it. We've got approval, everything's cool. Let's talk about how to export this thing, how to output it. There's several different ways. I'm going to click on construct right here to go back to our construct part of the application. And I'll take just a moment real quick you see all these different layers, all these different shots. what this is my original shot that when I was working on the movie, this is what it looked like. And so again, everything on the bottom is the active layer, and everything on top is a version. And so as I was working on it, maybe out of frustration or just wanting to experiment with something else, I create a new version, and that gives me a new starting point that I can then continue the grade on. At any point in time, you can switch to any of these other versions, and Scratch does a good job of just saving it. And so you have these stacks in your slot. And so that's why, a final scene might look like this, where several different varieties. And it's also an easy tool. So say if you're doing some preliminary grades beforehand, let me just hop back into the player. If you swipe to the right, you bring up that same display of your slot, but it's just the slot you're active on. And so say you're doing some preliminary grades before the DP or director comes in, and you want to give them some options. Well, you could just have all your versions here, and you just simply click on them, and I don't know what that first one was, sorry about that, but you just simply click on them, and you can kind of A/B what, some different looks that you've been working on. And then you can move them around and assign whichever one you want to be your final one. All right. So going back to the construct, so we're ready to go. We want to render this out. Anything that you render, again, will be this bottom, whatever's on the bottom layer will get rendered out. So I'm going to click on my output tab over here on the left. Like right now, it's in timeline mode. And then I'm going to click on output, and that brings our output nodes. And so this little orange triangle is the very beginning of it's basically our construct that we're working on, and it's always associated with at least one node. And so this is the output node that is associated with our initial construct. And then from here, you can branch out and make as many different outputs as you want. And outputs, by that I'm meaning renders. And so let's add an output node, and it's automatically selected. And so down here in the bottom left, we can choose exactly what we want. By default, it's going to match the settings of what we had, which matches the settings of the footage that we applied, that we're working with. But say we want to not do DPX 10-bit, we're going to make 16-bit TIFFs. And so I can choose, I'm working down here in the bottom center, and I can choose TIFF. You can choose, 8-bit or 16-bit, whatever you want. We're going to keep everything in linear. We're not going to go back to a log space. You can set your filter. So if there's doing any kind of scaling, you can set your filter. And again, if scaling, you want to do a different width or different aspect ratio, you can certainly do that. And so there's some defaults here. We say we want to make this is a 2K scan, and so we want to make an HD deliverable. And so I'm going to click on HD, and that will scale that image to HD. And then say we want to make, at the same time, to save some time, let's make a different output. So this top one is going to be our HD output, and then this one, we want to make a QuickTime. And so the QuickTime output's a little bit different, but it allows you to create a QuickTime in any of the different codecs. I'm going to click on play, and that brings us back to that specific node. And in the same place that I was adding those plugins, we're going to add the QuickTime plugin. So click on native, QuickTime export, apply selection. All right, so this brings up our QuickTime variables, just like as if it was a visual effects plugin, we're making a QuickTime plugin. And here are all the different codecs that I have loaded on this machine. And so for this sake, let's do 10-bit RGB uncompressed. Anyways, all right, so you can click back on construct, and that builds this QuickTime node right here so that we can export a QuickTime. All right, so that's a brief overview of the QuickTimes. Of the outputs. You can render those files, and of course, you always have an SDI out, depending on your system. And that SDI out is a great way that if you need to record dailies or whatnot, you can hook it up directly to a deck or hook it up to a different machine that has an SDIN and capture it. It's a very useful tool. All right, I think that is coming to an end of the webinar. And again, my name is Parke Gregg, and if you're ever down in Austin, please come check us out. We're stuck on. And I want to thank again Sony Pictures Classics and Director Jeff Nichols for letting us work on their scene from their film Take Shelter. And Marcelo, back to you.
Parke, fantastic presentation. Congratulations. Great job. Thank you for doing this. Everybody, you have a question box right in front of you. Can you please type in your comments, what you thought about Parke's presentation? Although many of you have already been telling me that you've been loving it. So that's good job, Parke. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
It's time for prizes. It is prize time now. And one really lucky attendee will win Assimilate's Scratch Lab, the industry's premier conform and color grading solution designed to meet the unique requirements of file-based workflows in episodic and spot broadcast facility. This prize is valued at $10 million. Okay, well, it's not that much, but it is $4,999, so it is worth quite a bit. So one lucky attendee will win that, and you do have to be present to win. And unfortunately, I cannot win that, which bums me out a bit. But we'll pick a winner here. Mike Burton. Mike Burton, you are the winner. Congratulations for winning the Scratch Lab prize. That is one heck of a prize, and I think you just made yourself a whole bunch of new friends here today. So there you go. We'll move on here. I want to remind you to continue tweeting and make sure you follow Filmmaking Dude. Don't forget to use the hashtag #PoundFilmmakingWebinars. That's how we'll know who's tweeted. At the end of the day today, 2 random followers will be picked, and each one will win one on-demand webinar from us. And stick around because we're going to be doing a Q&A right now after a couple of screens here. Also, I want to remind you to like us on Facebook. Just go to facebook.com/filmmakingwebinars. You'll get tons of our information. And also, we have lots of on-demand webinars. Just go to ondemand.filmmakingwebinars.com, and we have tons of topics there, including this one will be available on demand starting tomorrow. It'll include not only the archive, but it includes also a podcast interview, which I'm doing with Parke right after this webinar, of him answering more questions he doesn't get to answer today. And also includes a bonus how-to video. What was that about, Parke?
The bonus material is about the edit mode, rather, in Scratch.
That's right. You go into detail on that.
Certainly, yes.
Yeah, cool. And please make sure you email Steve at Assimilate. I put in the email address there to thank him because we are offering this for free. We usually charge $15 for on-demand webinars, and this one will be offered for free. So please make sure you send an email, and I will post it again in the question box in just a second so you can email him. Also, I want to remind you that we have lots of live free webinars. If you don't want to spend a dime, that's fine with us. Just go to live.filmmakingwebinars.com. You can register for as many as you want. We have lots of them over there, and they're all as good content-wise as this was. So definitely just go to live.filmmakingwebinars.com. It is time now for Q&A, sponsored again by Assimilate. So, Parke, we have literally 10,000 questions. So I'm gonna I'm gonna send to you control because I know some of these questions you're gonna have to show the answers to. All right, first question: can you make LUTs in Scratch to apply to field monitors to check the look as you shoot?
That's a good question. I do know that you can export out a LUT. Now, whether it's in the exact format that your field monitor could use, I'm not sure. Typically, in my experience, for monitoring on the field, you kind of want just a LUT to put it in the color space of your final deliverable. If you're looking for a real look and you want to use a LUT as more of a specific grade, there's probably a way. I mean, Scratch has some really good tools for bringing LUTs in and exporting LUTs, but that's not a feature that I really use that much. So I can't be an expert on that. Sorry.
Are LUTs standardized in the format that they're shared? Pretty much.
No.
So I would imagine. Oh, they're not. So it really does depend on your monitor. So you would have to check with your field monitor of what kind of LUT it supports.
Yeah, I mean they all do the same kind of thing, but much like maybe like 10 or 15 years ago, where you had a a word processor document, and before Microsoft Word was really the only one. They all basically did the same thing, but you had all these different formats, different ways of organizing the data. It's similar with LUTs, and there's some good translation tools, or at least people offer services to translate LUTs for different applications, different software applications, and different applications in the field. And so, LUT is kind of a mystic art, and I'm not sure if anybody fully understands LUTs through and through.
And it stands for lookup tables, because some people were asking, what does LUT stand for, right?
Yeah, it's a lookup table, and basically it's a translator, and so you're translating color information from A to B, and so you can think of it as like a Babel fish for color. And so camera companies will produce LUTs that kind of take, they know how their camera interprets color, and so they'll create a LUT to bring it into a more standardized color space, like Rec 709 or DCP P3 or what have you. And so, and LUTs can also be used as an actual grade for a clip or a scene. And so, LUT is a very confusing term in general. And if anybody has any real specific questions about use of LUTs, I'd be happy to try to answer, but I'm no expert.
Well, very good, though. Can you bring in a finished sequence from Final Cut Pro?
I believe in the brand new version of Scratch, it allows to import an XML. I've not utilized that function. I know they've been talking about it, and so I'm not exactly sure where it is. But you can certainly bring in an EDL. And so with Final Cut 7 or Avid or Premiere, you can import an EDL. You're fairly limited to a single timeline, which is not necessarily a bad limitation. It's good to get the edit down to a single timeline for an organization standpoint. But so the workflow that I use is EDL from Final Cut. On the Avid side, you can also import a ALE. It's just one more option. And again, on the new version, I believe you have a lot more import options. Cool.
What about blur, sharpen, defocus? For example, is there a way to manage individual sharpness or individual output nodes?
I think what they're asking is, can we blur a specific area? And yes, there's a couple different ways of going about that. So I'm going to click over into the matrix, and I'm just going to do a shape, but you could certainly do a key. You could key in a certain tone, like a color, and then blur it. So I'm going to draw this shape around his face, and then I'm going to click over here on, where am I going to click? On my texture. And in blur, this kind of stands for, I'm sorry, I'm going to use this F blur. I assume that's a focus blur, I'm not sure. And so I'm dialing, I'm here at the bottom center of the screen, by the way. And so I'm dialing in a blur, and it's just affecting what's on that, inside that, that shape I drew. And it doesn't, so I'm toggling it in and out. And so it doesn't have to be a shape. Like we could just, instead of using a shape, we could qualify, like say the highlights. And so if we want to blur all the highlights, that's the wrong one. Sorry. Let me get rid of that shape. Anyways, so the short answer is yes. I don't know if you could tell that the highlights are being blurred or not. You can look over here around the door. So I'm going to toggle it on and off. And so we're just blurring those highlights. And again,
so as opposed to it being a shape, it is now you're affecting highlights or the contrast.
Yeah, and you could key that into a specific color or whatnot.
Right. Question here is, do you use scopes? Because you're not using scopes here now. Do you have an external scope? Is that why you're not using scopes? Or are you trying to reserve some real estate for the webinar? And also, does Scratch have built-in scopes?
Yes, I do use external scopes, and I recommend that. I totally meant to bring this up in the webinar, so thank you for asking about that. Scratch does have scopes, and so one of the swipe functions, if you swipe to the top of the screen, you get this toolbar, and then there's this button here called Statistics, and that's, again, Scratch has their own vocabulary for everything. And so the statistics is their scopes. And for the built-in scopes, I use their histogram. They have a good RGB histogram, and that's really helpful for balancing blacks and balancing your whites. They also have waveform, oscilloscope, and a curve scope.
And in your opinion, are they pretty accurate, or do you still recommend external scopes?
I always recommend external scopes because the internal scopes are very accurate, but they're not looking at what you're looking at on your monitor. They're looking at what is in.
They're not looking at the output. They're looking at what's in the application.
Exactly, and
right.
So that's if you're really using your scopes to grade, you just have to keep that in mind of your limitations. For example, we may be working in this on this project, and internally it's dealing with the raw color data, but your SDI output may be set to Rec 709, and so it's applying, it's basically massaging the output to fit inside the specs of Rec 709. It's not adjusting the color, but it's adjusting what level is white and what level is black. And so it's real important to be able to monitor your output and not just what's internal. So so short answer, the internal scopes are good, but they're not end all.
It's a good place to start, right? You always want to double check with external. Cool.
And so like when I'm normally working, because on the webinar, I was just looking at my computer monitor, but typically I'll be looking at my grading monitor, and so very often I'll keep this histogram up as just a good reference tool of what I'm working with.
Cool. Is there a storyboard on Scratch so that I can see all the visual thumbnails instead of doing numerical forward and backwards?
Yes, there is. A feature, one of the many features that I didn't talk about is called a tray. And over here on the left, bottom left, there's a button here called tray. And I'm going to just click on that to open up. And so that kind of takes over the bottom area of the screen. And if you click on this arrow, you get a little menu. And you can create a tray. Like I'll create a new tray. And then you can apply shots in it. You can use it. It's like they call it a tray. It's like a storage drawer or something. If you think of it as like a chest of drawers, you can kind of put whatever you want in it. But you can also click on timeline. And so that will show you your timeline. Excuse me, the clip that you're on will be highlighted in white. And then you can jump around to another clip. And this is, in the webinar, I talk about that trim tool where you can grab a grade from a couple shots back. This is really helpful because you can open up this tray and then you can just see like, oh, well, the shot I really want is, 1, 2, 3, 4 clips back. And so using your control surface, or you can close the tray and then do it with your mouse, click on 4 shots back. So the tray, when selected on the timeline, gives you that kind of thumbnail view of your timeline.
Cool. Regarding keyframes, there's just 2 questions. Number 1, can I see all the keyframes that I've created? And then number 2, can I curve those keyframes?
Yes. Yes and yes. I'll try to show them. Let's see, which keyframe did I do a little more extensive? All right, so I'll go into, I believe it was this one. All right, so you can see your keyframes when you go to the section that you're working on. And so like we went to the process node or mode and on FX controls. And so here in this timeline in the center of the screen, we've got these white hash marks, and that shows you where you have a keyframe. If you click on range right above that, it will just show you that shot. And so let me move so the thick bar is your playhead, and these little white hash marks are where your keyframes are. If you want to adjust those and kind of manipulate the curve on those, click on the animation button that's just here to the left. And sometimes you have to kind of hunt around to find exactly what you're going for. But so here's amplitude. I know I keyframed that, and so I selected amplitude, and then that showed me the graph here. Let me put that in the center here. All right, so then here is our, the curve of the animation that we did. And if you want to ramp it in, you have these Bezier controls where you can really fine tune how that variable gets adjusted over time. All right, I think that's it.
Cool. Well, unfortunately, we are completely out of time, everybody. Parke, I do want to thank you for presenting today, and also for doing our webinar, which is coming right up. Or I'm sorry, our podcast, which is coming right up next. So thank you so much for doing this.
You bet. It's my pleasure. And, go see this film. It's coming out this fall. I think you'll like it.
Cool. Definitely. I also want to thank Assimilate Inc. for providing such a cool prize to give away and for their support as well. Thank you so much. Most important, I want to thank each and every one of you for attending our webinar today. I sincerely hope you enjoyed it. I do want to remind you to attend our free live webinar next week, Editing Bootcamp, the Director's Cut, where Misha Tenenbaum will show you how to keep the collaborative partnership between the director and editor smooth and collaborative. Just visit filmmakingwebinars.com to register for it. So until the next webinar, I am your host, Marcelo Lewin. Cheers, everybody.